The summer of 2023 had been an unusually hot one, but the sweltering heat was the least of my worries. As a freelance journalist, I often chase stories that others deem too dangerous or too absurd. But when the email from an anonymous sender landed in my inbox, I knew I was facing a different kind of risk. The subject line read, "Discover the most dangerous town in the world." Curiosity ignited my adrenaline. I had heard whispers about a town called Jericho Hollow, isolated deep in the Appalachian Mountains, shrouded in urban legends and horror stories. Some said it was haunted, while others claimed it was a refuge for outlaws and drifters. I'd seen my fair share of eerie places, but this was something entirely different. The prospect of delving into the unknown gripped my imagination. I clicked on the email, and as I read the contents, my heart raced with a mix of excitement and dread. The sender claimed that Jericho Hollow had a dark history, unexplained disappearances, cult-like gatherings, and a strange phenomenon where the townsfolk never seemed to age. But it wasn't just the legends that drew me, it was the challenge of uncovering the truth behind the town's sinister reputation. I spent the next few days researching. The deeper I delved, the more I unearthed stories of missing persons, unexplained occurrences, and a community that turned inward, isolating itself from the outside world. The most chilling detail I found was about the Harvest Festival, an annual event where, allegedly, the town celebrated in a manner that involved rituals that outsiders were never allowed to witness. Despite the warnings and the ominous stories, I felt an insatiable need to go. After all, as a journalist, I had a responsibility to seek the truth. I made arrangements, packed my gear, and set out on the winding roads leading to Jericho Hollow, my heart racing with anticipation and trepidation. The journey itself was eerie. The mountains loomed like silent sentinels, their shadows stretching over the narrow, winding roads. As I drove deeper into the mountains, the air thickened with an oppressive silence, broken only by the crunch of gravel beneath my tires and the occasional rustle of leaves. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Finally, after hours of driving, I entered Jericho Hollow. The first thing I noticed was the pervasive stillness. It was as if the very air was holding its breath. The few buildings that lined the main street were old, some barely standing, their wood bleached by years of neglect and weathering, the paint chipped away, leaving behind a ghostly facade. I parked my car and stepped out, the silence wrapping around me like a shroud. The town square, if one could call it that, was empty except for a weathered statue of a man holding a pitchfork, its eyes seeming to follow me. I felt a chill creep up my spine. As I surveyed my surroundings, a sense of foreboding enveloped me, but I pushed it aside. I was here for a story, and I would find it. With a notebook in hand, I wandered into the heart of the town, my footsteps echoing against the cracked pavement. As I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was intruding on something sacred and dangerous. There was an unsettling energy in the air, a whisper of warning that brushed against my skin like cold fingers. I approached a small diner, its neon sign flickering in the dying light. The bell above the door chimed as I stepped inside, and the scent of greasy food and stale coffee hit me like a wave. The few patrons inside turned to look at me, their expressions unreadable. I felt their eyes bore into me, studying me as if I were an anomaly. I took a seat at the counter, trying to appear casual, but the unease bubbled beneath the surface. The waitress, a thin woman with tired eyes and a wary demeanor, approached. "What'll it be?" she asked, her voice flat. "Just coffee, please," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. As she poured the coffee, I glanced around the diner. The walls were adorned with faded photographs, scenes from a happier time, families, festivals, smiling faces. Yet something felt off. The smiles seemed forced, as if the people in those pictures were hiding secrets of their own. I turned my attention back to the waitress. "So, what's the story with Jericho Hollow? I've heard some interesting things." Her eyes narrowed, and she set the coffee cup in front of me with a clatter. "You shouldn't be asking questions about this place. It's not safe," she warned, her voice low. "Best to keep to yourself while you're here." Her warning hung in the air, heavy and foreboding. I could feel the tension in the diner rising, like a coiled spring about to snap. Ignoring the sinking feeling in my gut, I pressed on. What about the harvest festival? What happens during that time? The waitress stiffened, her gaze darting around the diner before settling on me again. You should leave. This town, it changes people. Just remember, you came here for a story, not for trouble. With that, she turned away, leaving me with more questions than answers. Part of me wanted to leave right then, to drive back to the safety of civilization, but the other part, the journalist, craved the thrill of uncovering the truth. I sipped my coffee, the bitter taste mingling with the rising fear in my stomach. I had come too far to turn back now. I needed to learn more. After finishing my coffee, I paid the bill and stepped outside, the chill of the evening air wrapping around me. I decided to explore further, hoping to find someone willing to share the town's secrets. As I walked, I noticed the sun dipping below the mountains, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward me like grasping hands. I made my way to a dilapidated building with a sign that read, Town Hall. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The air was thick with dust, and the faint scent of mildew filled my nostrils. Old wooden chairs were stacked haphazardly against the walls, and the floor creaked underfoot. In the corner of the room stood a man, his back to me, fiddling with a pile of papers. I cleared my throat. Excuse me, can you tell me about Jericho Hollow? He turned slowly, his face shadowed. You're not from around here, are you? His voice was deep, gravelly, with a hint of something unnameable lurking beneath. No, I'm a journalist, I replied, forcing myself to sound confident despite the chill that crept down my spine. I'm here to learn about the town, the history, especially the harvest festival. His expression darkened. It's not a place for outsiders. You should go, now. I pressed on, undeterred. What happens during the festival? He stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. You really don't want to know. People have gone missing after asking too many questions. The tension in the air thickened, and I felt an overwhelming urge to run, but instead I stood my ground. I can't just leave without understanding. Please, just tell me what you know. He hesitated, glancing around as if the walls themselves were listening. There are things in this town that are better left alone, but if you must know, the harvest festival is different. It's a celebration of sorts, but it comes with a price. The townsfolk offer something to the woods, something dark and ancient. My heart raced. What do you mean? He leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper. The town doesn't age because it gives life to something in return. The festival is a ritual, a pact with the woods. You don't want to be here when it happens. Leave before it's too late. As his words sank in, the hairs on my neck stood on end. I could feel the weight of his warning, but the fire of determination burned brighter. I had to see the festival for myself, to witness whatever sinister pact this town had made. Thank you for the warning, I said, backing away slowly, sensing that any further inquiry would only plunge me deeper into danger. I stepped outside, the door creaking ominously behind me. The shadows had deepened, and the town now felt alive, breathing and watching. I realized that I was no longer a mere observer. I was part of this chilling narrative. Jericho Hollow wasn't just a place on a map, it was a living, breathing entity with secrets that entwined themselves around the souls who dared to enter. I decided to find a place to stay for the night, but as I walked back to my car, I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye. A figure stood at the edge of the town, half hidden in the trees. A fleeting silhouette, a shadow in the gathering darkness. I froze, heart racing, as the figure slowly turned to face me. The moment hung in the air like a thunderstorm, heavy with unspoken words. I could see the outline of a person, but the details remained obscured in the twilight. With every instinct screaming at me to flee, I took a step back, but my curiosity anchored me in place. The figure raised a hand, gesturing for me to come closer, and in that moment, I knew I was standing at the precipice of something far more dangerous than I had ever imagined. The figure remained still, cloaked in the dimness of the trees, their presence both inviting and ominous. My pulse quickened as I strained to make out any details, but the fading light cast a veil over them. Was it a local, a fellow traveler, or something more sinister? Who are you? I called out, my voice a shaky whisper. The words hung in the air, swallowed by the dense silence of Jericho Hollow. The figure didn't respond, but a slight shift in the trees told me they had moved closer. I felt an inexplicable pull, like a moth drawn to a flame, and against my better judgment I took a tentative step forward. "Are you from around here?" I tried again, this time louder, desperate for a connection, for some sense of understanding. "I'm just trying to learn about the town." A laugh, soft and chilling, echoed through the woods. "Learn or unearth." The voice was melodic, yet dripping with an unsettling undertone. It sent shivers racing down my spine. I finally caught a glimpse of the person standing before me, a young woman, perhaps in her early 20s, with long, dark hair that cascaded like a waterfall over her shoulders. Her eyes glinted in the waning light, a strange mix of curiosity and something darker. "I've been watching you," she said, stepping into the light, revealing a face that was both beautiful and haunting. "You have a thirst for the truth, don't you?" "Who are you?" I repeated, although now I was more intrigued than afraid. "What do you know about the Harvest Festival?" She smiled, but there was an edge to it, like a wolf revealing its teeth. "You should not be here, especially not now. The festival is coming soon, and it is not what you think." "What do you mean?" I pressed, eager for answers. Her gaze drifted toward the treetops, where the last remnants of daylight battled against the encroaching darkness. "It's a time when the veil between worlds grows thin. People come to offer their sacrifices, in the woods. They have their own appetite." My heart raced with both fear and fascination. Sacrifices? What kind of sacrifices? She tilted her head, her expression thoughtful, almost pitying. "You're not ready for that knowledge. You don't understand the weight of what you're asking, but you will, soon enough. It's in the very air you breathe here." The unease that had been lurking at the edges of my mind now swelled, wrapping around my chest like a vice. "I need to know," I insisted, my voice more desperate now. "If I'm going to write this story, I have to understand everything." She stepped closer, the shadows dancing around her as if alive. "You think you can just walk away with the truth? This town has a way of claiming its own. You're treading on sacred ground." Suddenly, the wind picked up, howling through the trees, carrying with it the faint sound of distant drums. The rhythm echoed in the stillness, a haunting call that felt like an omen. I glanced around, suddenly aware of the darkness pressing in, wrapping around me like a shroud. "Listen," the woman urged, her voice urgent. "You need to leave before the sun sets completely. The woods will awaken, and once they do, there's no turning back." Panic surged through me. "I can't leave without knowing more. Please," I implored, feeling a mixture of fear and determination. She hesitated, as if battling an internal struggle, before taking a deep breath. "Fine, but you must promise to heed my warning. Do not venture too deep into the woods, and do not stray from the path." "I promise," I said, though the truth was that I was already teetering on the edge of recklessness. With a final glance toward the encroaching darkness, she motioned for me to follow. We walked in silence, the sound of our footsteps muted by the thick underbrush. As we made our way through the trees, I noticed how the environment around us seemed to shift. The air grew heavier, the shadows lengthening in a way that felt almost sentient. "Do you know what really happens during the Harvest Festival?" she asked, her tone suddenly serious. I shook my head. "No, just the rumors, disappearances, strange rituals, but I want to understand what it all means." She nodded, her expression somber. "It's a ritual of renewal, but it requires sacrifice. The townspeople offer something to the woods, something they hold dear. Sometimes it's an object, sometimes it's a person." A chill ran down my spine, and I stumbled slightly. "A person? What do you mean?" She stopped and turned to face me, her eyes narrowing. "Every year, the town selects someone, a stranger, someone who doesn't belong. They are brought to the woods and the forest. It takes them. In return, the town remains untouched by time, thriving even as the world outside crumbles." My breath quickened, the implications of her words settling like a stone in my stomach. "And you're telling me this as if it's normal?" "It is normal for Jericho Hollow," she replied, her voice steady but laced with urgency. "You don't understand. The townsfolk don't just accept this fate, they embrace it. They believe it's their duty to uphold the pact." "What happens to those who are taken?" I asked, a knot of dread tightening in my chest. Her eyes softened, and for a moment, I saw genuine fear reflected back at me. They disappear into the woods, their souls forever bound to the darkness. Some say they become part of the forest, lost in wandering. A shudder coursed through me. I had always believed that curiosity was a virtue, but now, standing here, it felt like a curse. The night was closing in, and the reality of Jericho Hollow was more terrifying than I had anticipated. "I need to go," I said, my voice trembling as I turned to leave, but she reached out and grasped my arm gently. "Please, listen to me. If you're going to stay, don't reveal your intentions to anyone. Trust no one, and whatever you do, don't stray from the path. There are eyes everywhere." With her warning echoing in my mind, I retreated from the woods, my heart pounding. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had only scratched the surface of a deeper darkness, one that extended far beyond the town's sinister reputation. I was a journalist, yes, but I was also a target, an outsider, and Jericho Hollow was far more dangerous than I had ever imagined. As I reached the edge of the woods, I turned back to look at the woman, but she had vanished into the shadows, leaving me alone in the dimming twilight. The oppressive silence settled around me once more, and the distant sound of drums now felt like a heartbeat, steady and ominous. I stumbled back toward the diner, my mind racing with questions and fears. What had I gotten myself into? The townsfolk were part of a pact that I could barely comprehend, and I was standing on the precipice of something dark and ancient. The weight of their secrets pressed down on me, but I had come too far to turn back now. As I entered the diner, the familiar scent of grease and coffee enveloped me. The few patrons still inside turned their heads, their gazes piercing, but I felt a different kind of energy in the air. They were waiting, watching me, with an intensity that sent chills through my spine. I slid into a booth in the corner, my mind racing. The waitress approached, her expression inscrutable. "Back so soon? Did you find what you were looking for?" "Not yet," I replied, forcing myself to maintain composure, "but I'm hoping to learn more." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You need to be careful. You're stirring something that should remain undisturbed." I could feel the tension building in the diner, a shared knowledge that I was not privy to. "What do you mean? What is it about this town that everyone is so afraid of?" She looked over her shoulder as if afraid of being overheard. "There are things here that have lived long before the town was founded. They exist in the woods, and they don't take kindly to outsiders. You're a curiosity to them, a plaything. They watch and wait." A shudder ran through me at her words. The oppressive atmosphere, the lurking shadows, and the whispers of danger filled my mind. I knew I was running out of time. The festival was approaching, and I could feel the heartbeat of the town quickening around me. "I have to find out what's going to happen during the harvest festival," I said, determination fueling my words despite the unease creeping in. "Don't be a fool," she warned, her voice sharp. "There are some truths you're better off not knowing. The woods will claim you if you don't tread carefully." Before I could respond, the door swung open and a gust of cold wind swept through the diner. A group of men entered, their demeanor imposing and their eyes scanning the room. They wore heavy jackets, their faces weathered, and they exuded an air of authority that immediately silenced the diner. I felt my heart drop as they turned their gaze toward me. The air thickened with tension, and the hairs on my neck stood on end. It was as if they knew something about me, something I didn't even know myself. I looked back at the waitress, whose face had gone pale. "Leave now," she mouthed, her eyes wide with fear. Before I could stand, one of the men approached our table, his expression hard and unyielding. "You're the outsider, the one asking questions." "Yes, I started, but he cut me off. "You need to leave this place," he said, his voice low and menacing. "You don't belong here." "I'm just trying to learn about the town," I protested, my voice shaky. "I'm a journalist. I have a right to." "You have no rights here," he snarled, leaning in closer, his breath hot against my face. "This town has its rules, and you've broken them by simply being here. You're a threat." The waitress's eyes widened in alarm, and the other patrons had fallen silent, their faces turned toward us as if drawn into the brewing storm. "Leave while you still can," he continued, his voice a low growl. "If you don't, you'll find out what happens to those who cross the line." As he stepped back, the other men followed, their presence heavy and suffocating. I could feel their eyes on me, a suffocating pressure that made it difficult to breathe. They were predators and I was the prey. Without waiting for another word, I bolted from the diner, my heart racing. I needed to find safety, to regroup and make sense of the chaos swirling around me. But the moment I stepped outside, I was met with an unsettling sight. The street was empty, the shadows growing longer as the sun dipped below the horizon. The distant sound of drums now echoed louder, pulsating through the air, a call to something dark and ancient. I turned and ran toward my car, the gravel crunching beneath my feet, but every instinct screamed that I wasn't alone. As I fumbled with the car keys, I could feel it, a presence lurking just beyond the trees, watching, waiting. I glanced back toward the diner, but the windows were dark, the patrons invisible in the gathering gloom. I jumped into my car, slamming the door shut, and locked it. My breath came in ragged gasps as I gripped the steering wheel, heart racing. The forest loomed around me, dense and ominous, and I could hear the faint whispers of something alive within it. What had I stumbled into? I had come seeking a story, but I had become embroiled in something far more sinister. Jericho Hollow was alive, a living nightmare, and I was at its mercy. I started the engine, the car rumbling to life. I needed to get away from here, far away, but as I glanced in the rearview mirror, I saw them, figures emerging from the woods, shadows against the fading light. They moved with an unnatural grace, gliding toward me, their features obscured, but their intent clear. Panic surged through me. I shifted into reverse and pressed the gas pedal, my heart pounding as I fled down the empty street, leaving the darkness of Jericho Hollow behind. But as I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something far more terrifying, something I had yet to fully understand. And no matter how far I ran, the darkness would always be one step behind me. As I drove away from Jericho Hollow, my heart raced and a cold sweat drenched my palms. The mountains loomed behind me, dark and oppressive, and I could almost feel their sinister gaze following my escape. The engine roared in protest as I pushed the car to its limits, desperate to distance myself from the town and the horrors it concealed. Yet, even as I sped down the winding roads, the echoes of the distant drums lingered in my mind, a haunting reminder that my ordeal was far from over. I had just rounded a bend when my phone buzzed violently on the passenger seat. I quickly snatched it up, hoping to find solace in the familiar, digital world. Instead, a message from an unknown number greeted me. "You're not safe. They will come for you. Don't go back." My stomach twisted in knots. I looked in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the shadowy figures closing in. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I couldn't afford to let fear dictate my actions. I pulled over to the side of the road, my heart racing as I considered my options. I had two choices: head back to civilization and abandon my story, or turn around and dive deeper into the mystery that had ensnared me. In that moment, I felt a surge of defiance. I was a journalist, and I had come too far to turn back now. I needed to understand the truth behind Jericho Hollow, the Harvest Festival, and the dark forces that governed this town. The haunting woman in the woods had warned me, but I was willing to risk it all for a glimpse into the shadows. With renewed determination, I turned the car around, the gravel crunching beneath the tires as I headed back toward the ominous town. My heart pounded in my chest as the landscape changed around me, the road narrowing as I re-entered the realm of the unknown. I felt the weight of the mountains pressing in on me, and the air grew heavy with an unseen tension. As I entered Jericho Hollow once more, the atmosphere felt different, charged, almost electric. The sun had fully set, leaving behind a sky cloaked in darkness, save for the flickering lights of the diner. I parked my car and stepped out, the cool night air wrapping around me like a shroud. The distant sound of drums reverberated through the town, drawing me in like a moth to a flame. With each step toward the diner, my apprehension grew, but so did my curiosity. I pushed the door open, and the bell chimed, announcing my presence. The diner was nearly empty now, with only a few locals scattered at the counters, their faces etched with worry. The waitress from earlier glanced up, her expression a mixture of relief and fear when she saw me. "I told you to leave," she said, her voice barely above a whisper as I took a seat at the counter. "I couldn't," I admitted, looking around as the unsettling feeling of being watched returned. "I need to know what's happening. The Harvest Festival is coming, and I can't ignore it." Most people don't come back after the first time, she replied, pouring me a cup of coffee. Her hands trembled slightly as she set the steaming mug in front of me. You should have listened. This town, it has a way of drawing you in and keeping you. What do you mean? I pressed, trying to decipher the weight behind her words. She hesitated, glancing toward the back of the diner where a group of men sat huddled in conversation. The festival is not just a celebration, it's a reckoning. The woods demand something, and it's not always what you expect. I leaned closer, desperate for more information. What do they demand? Is it true that people go missing during the festival? She lowered her voice. Not just missing, taken. The woods have a hunger, and the townsfolk are willing to feed it. They believe it's a necessity to maintain their lives, their immortality. They think it's a fair exchange. I felt the chill of her words seep into my bones. But what happens to those who are taken? Some say they become part of the woods, trapped forever. Others believe they serve the darkness, becoming something else entirely. She shivered, as if recalling a nightmare. You need to be careful. The townsfolk will know you're here. They'll see you as a threat, and they won't hesitate to act. Just then, the door swung open, and the man from before, the one who had confronted me in the diner earlier, entered. His presence was commanding, and the atmosphere shifted as he stepped inside. The conversations hushed and all eyes turned toward him. "Looks like we have an uninvited guest," he said, his voice dripping with disdain as he spotted me at the counter. I felt the blood drain from my face as he approached, the eyes of the diner's patrons fixating on me like predators sizing up their prey. "What are you doing back here?" he demanded, looming over me. I started, but the words caught in my throat. "Don't you have any sense?" he growled. "You're in dangerous waters and you've crossed the line." The waitress stepped in, her voice steady despite the tension. "She's just trying to understand, Tom. Maybe if you explained it." He cut her off. "No, it's too late for explanations. The harvest festival is upon us, and outsiders aren't welcome. You're playing with fire, and we won't protect you when it gets too hot." "I'm not afraid," I said, surprising myself with the conviction in my voice. "I need to know the truth. I have to understand what's happening here." Tom's expression hardened, and he leaned closer, his breath hot against my ear. "You think you're brave? You don't know the darkness that lurks in these woods. You're nothing but a pawn in a game you don't understand." Just then, the sound of drums intensified, echoing through the diner, reverberating in my chest. The atmosphere grew thick with tension, and I could see the fear in the eyes of the other patrons as they exchanged glances. "I won't let you hurt her," the waitress said suddenly, stepping between us. "She deserves to know the truth, even if it's too late." The tension in the air was palpable as Tom narrowed his eyes. "You're risking everything by standing up for her. You don't know what they'll do to you if you're caught aiding an outsider." "Maybe it's time someone did," she retorted, her voice firm. As the two faced off, I felt a sense of urgency rising within me. I had to break the tension, to seize the moment. "Please, just tell me what I need to know. I can help." Before I could finish my sentence, the door burst open again, this time revealing a group of townsfolk, their faces grim and set in determination. They looked as if they had come straight from the woods, their clothes dirtied and their expressions feral. "Tom," one of them barked, "we need to talk. The festival preparations are underway, and we can't let her interfere." At that moment, a realization hit me like a jolt of electricity. They were planning something, and I was caught in the middle of their machinations. I could feel the weight of their collective gaze on me, as if they were assessing the threat I posed. "No," I said, finding my voice amidst the rising chaos. "I'm not here to interfere. I just want to understand what's happening. Please, let me help." The group exchanged wary glances, and Tom's expression shifted, revealing a flicker of uncertainty. "What could you possibly do?" "I can write," I declared, surprising even myself with the conviction in my tone. "I can document the truth of what happens here. Maybe if the world knew about Jericho Hollow, you wouldn't have to keep making these sacrifices." The room fell silent, the townsfolk studying me as if weighing my words. The drums pulsed rhythmically, almost like a heartbeat, underscoring the tension hanging in the air. I could sense their hesitation, their unwillingness to fully accept an outsider into their world. After a long pause, Tom crossed his arms. You think your words can change what's already been written in the fabric of this town. You think you can just waltz in here and make it better. I felt the weight of his skepticism, but I pressed on. If you're going to sacrifice someone during the festival, don't you want the world to know why? Don't you want to expose the truth? Another townsfolk, an older woman with weary eyes, stepped forward. You don't understand what you're asking. The forest is unforgiving. It demands tribute, and if we don't comply, we risk everything. Then let me help you, I pleaded, desperation creeping into my voice. I can be an ally. I'll make sure your voices are heard. You won't be alone. A murmur swept through the group, and for a moment, I felt a glimmer of hope. But Tom's expression remained hardened. You think this is a game. You think your words will shield you from what's coming. You have no idea what you're dealing with. I know enough to understand that this isn't right. I shot back, anger boiling over. People shouldn't be sacrificed to appease some ancient force. You deserve to break free from this cycle. The waitress, her voice trembling, chimed in. If you're going to do this, you need to leave now. Don't linger. The longer you stay, the more dangerous it becomes. Tom nodded, his expression softening just slightly. You don't have much time. The festival begins at dawn, and if you're still here, they'll come for you. If you truly want to help, you need to find a way to warn the outside world. I felt a rush of adrenaline surge through me. I'll find a way to expose this madness, but I can't do it alone. I need your help. As the tension hung in the air, the townsfolk exchanged uncertain glances. Finally, the older woman spoke again, her voice steady. If you truly mean what you say, then we'll give you one chance. But understand this, you're playing with fire and it will burn you. With that, the group began to disperse, leaving Tom and me at the counter. He looked at me, his expression conflicted. You're reckless, you know that. But if you're serious, you need to move quickly. The festival is a binding ritual, and if they see you as a threat, they won't hesitate to silence you. I understand, I replied, my heart racing with a mix of fear and determination. I'll do whatever it takes. As I stepped outside the diner, the cool night air rushed over me, grounding me in reality. The distant drums echoed louder, thrumming through my bones. I knew I was running out of time, and the darkness was closing in. But I wasn't alone anymore. I had allies, however tenuous. With the town's secrets at my fingertips, I would uncover the truth behind the Harvest Festival and expose the darkness lurking in Jericho Hollow, even if it meant risking my own life. As I drove through the town, the streets felt different, alive with an electric energy. The moon hung low in the sky, illuminating the path ahead, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from the shadows. I had entered a web of secrets, and the darkness was hungry. It was a race against time, and I was determined to unravel the mystery before dawn broke and the festival began. With each passing moment, the grip of Jericho Hollow tightened around me, and I knew I was entering a realm where danger lurked at every turn. The veil was thin, and the world I once understood was fading into a nightmare. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the challenge ahead. I would fight for the truth, even if it meant stepping into the depths of the unknown. I had come to Jericho Hollow, seeking a story, but what I found was a battle for survival, one that would test the very limits of my courage and resolve. As the drums echoed in the distance, I knew that the time to act was now. I would confront the darkness head-on, unravel the mysteries, and expose the truth, no matter the cost. The Harvest Festival was approaching, and I was determined to shine a light on the shadows that had long lingered over Jericho Hollow. The journey ahead would not be easy, but I would not back down. The darkness may have claimed many before me, but I was ready to face whatever horrors lay ahead, armed with nothing but my resolve and the flickering hope that the truth could set us free. The air was thick with tension as I drove through Jericho Hollow, the rhythmic pounding of drums reverberating like a heartbeat in my chest. My mind raced with questions, each one more urgent than the last. Who exactly was behind the Harvest Festival? What did they want from me? And most importantly, what would happen when dawn broke? The streets were eerily quiet now, the dim glow of street lamps casting long shadows that danced along the pavement. I passed by dilapidated houses, their windows boarded up as if the townsfolk were hiding from the very horrors they had created. I could almost feel the weight of their stares, the judgment of the townsfolk bearing down on me from the darkness. I needed a plan. I couldn't just sit back and wait for the festival to unfold. If I was going to expose the town's dark rituals, I needed to gather evidence, something concrete that would reveal the truth. I turned onto a side street where the houses were spaced further apart, giving way to the dense woods that loomed like sentinels at the edge of the town. The whispering trees seemed to beckon me closer, their gnarled branches swaying in the breeze as if they held secrets of their own. The last rays of sunlight barely filtered through, casting ghostly shadows on the ground. I parked my car by the edge of the forest, my heart pounding in my ears. I felt an inexplicable pull towards the woods, as if they were calling my name, urging me to venture deeper. With every step I took, the air grew cooler, heavier. The sound of the drums throbbed louder in the distance, and I realized that they were coming from within the forest. With a deep breath, I stepped into the darkness. The trees towered above me, their branches twisting like skeletal fingers against the night sky. The ground was littered with leaves and branches, making every step a careful negotiation. I could hear the distant chanting of voices blending with the drums, sending chills racing down my spine. As I ventured further, I saw flickering lights in the distance, small, flickering flames that danced like fireflies. Cautiously, I moved toward them, my heart racing with anticipation and fear. I knew that whatever lay ahead was dangerous, but I had to find out what was happening. The path narrowed as I approached the clearing, and soon I found myself at the edge of a large, circular space illuminated by torches that cast eerie shadows on the faces of the gathered townsfolk. They stood in a tight circle, their expressions a mix of fervor and fear, their voices rising and falling in a rhythmic chant. I ducked behind a tree, my breath shallow as I strained to hear their words. The language was unfamiliar, an ancient dialect that sent shivers down my spine, but I recognized the intensity of their emotions, the way their bodies swayed with the beat of the drums, the way their faces glowed in the firelight, twisted in what could only be described as worship. Tonight, we appeased the woods, a voice boomed, and I recognized it as Tom's. He stood at the center of the circle, raising a blade high above his head, the light reflecting off its gleaming surface. We honor those who came before us, and we sacrifice for those who will come after. The crowd erupted in cheers, their voices echoing through the trees, a cacophony of excitement mixed with dread. My heart raced as I realized what was about to happen. They weren't just celebrating, they were preparing for a sacrifice, a ritual that would bind them to the forest, ensuring their safety for another year. I had to get closer to record this madness before it was too late. I pulled out my phone, holding it steady as I began to record the scene. The glow of the screen was dim, but it illuminated my surroundings just enough to feel vulnerable. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears, thrumming in time with the drums, and for a moment, I was terrified that I would be discovered. But then I saw her, a woman standing at the edge of the crowd, her gaze locked on Tom with a fierce intensity. She looked familiar, and it took me a moment to realize that it was the waitress from the diner. Her face was pale, her lips pressed into a thin line, and I could see the tension in her shoulders. What was she doing here? Did she support this madness? Just then, Tom raised his voice again, the blade still glinting in the firelight. Tonight, we will offer a soul to the woods, a soul that will strengthen our bond with the darkness. We must ensure that our town thrives, that we remain untouched by the evils that lurk beyond our borders. The crowd's chant swelled, and I could feel the energy in the air, an almost electric tension that was both exhilarating and horrifying. The woman stepped forward, breaking free from the crowd, her voice ringing clear. "You're wrong, Tom. We can't keep doing this. This cycle of blood must end." A murmur swept through the crowd, and I could see the discomfort etched on their faces. "You're just afraid," Tom shot back, his voice rising. "Afraid of what happens if we don't comply. The woods will take what they want, and it won't be pretty. You know this." "No, we can find another way," she insisted, her eyes blazing with conviction. "We can break free from this darkness." The drums faltered for a moment, and I sensed a crack in the unyielding resolve of the townsfolk. I felt a surge of hope as I watched her stand up against Tom, a lone beacon of defiance in a sea of fear. If she could challenge their beliefs, maybe there was still a chance to change things. But then, Tom's expression hardened. "You'll regret this, you know. The woods will not take kindly to your rebellion." "Let them come," she shouted defiantly, her voice steady. We won't be pawns any longer." As her words hung in the air, I felt a gust of wind blow through the clearing, the flames flickering violently. The crowd seemed to waver, uncertainty creeping into their ranks. I knew I had to act fast. I needed to gather evidence and get out before the situation escalated. I stepped back, trying to make my way toward the trees, but just as I turned, I heard a rustle behind me. I spun around, my heart racing, only to come face to face with one of the townsfolk, a young man, his eyes wide with fear. "What are you doing here?" he whispered urgently, glancing over his shoulder as if afraid someone would hear. "I'm just trying to understand," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean to intrude, but I have to know what's happening." He shook his head, panic etched on his face. "You need to leave. You shouldn't be here. If they find you, they won't just let you go." "I can't," I insisted, desperation creeping into my voice. "I need to document this. The world needs to know what's happening in Jericho Hollow." He hesitated, glancing back toward the crowd. "If you really want to help, then you need to get out now. They're going to choose a sacrifice soon, and if you're still here..." His voice trailed off, the fear evident in his eyes. I felt my stomach drop. "What do you mean? Who are they going to sacrifice?" He shook his head, backing away slightly. "I can't tell you. Just know that you're in danger. Please, go." Before I could respond, he turned and disappeared into the trees, leaving me alone once more. My mind raced. I couldn't leave without knowing more. I needed to gather evidence, something tangible to take back with me. As I returned my attention to the gathering, I could see Tom raising the blade again, the townsfolk chanting as they swayed in unison. "Let the woods choose their offering," he declared, his voice booming through the clearing. "Let us bring forth the one who will feed the hunger." I felt a chill crawl up my spine as I realized the significance of his words. They were invoking something ancient, something powerful, and I was right in the center of it. Just then, the woman stepped forward again, her voice rising above the chanting. "This is madness. We can break free from this cycle. We can find another way." "Enough," Tom bellowed, slashing the air with his blade. "You are only jeopardizing our safety. If you cannot see that, then you are a fool." In that moment, I saw the fear in the eyes of the townsfolk, the doubt that lingered just beneath the surface. This was my chance. I needed to turn the tide, to show them that there was hope beyond the darkness that had claimed them for so long. "Listen to her," I shouted, stepping out from behind the tree. The crowd turned to me, surprise etched on their faces. "You don't have to do this. You can break free from this cycle of fear and sacrifice." A murmur rippled through the crowd, confusion and anger bubbling to the surface. "Who are you to tell us what to do?" Tom sneered, eyes narrowing. "I'm just a journalist," I said, my voice steady, "but I know that sacrificing someone to appease the darkness isn't the answer. You have the power to change your fate. You can refuse to participate in this ritual." The crowd wavered, and I could see the uncertainty in their faces. Some looked at Tom, their eyes filled with doubt, while others shifted their gazes to the woman who had challenged him. "You don't have to be afraid," I pressed, my heart racing. "You can fight against this darkness together. Don't let fear dictate your choices. Stand with her." But just as hope began to flicker in their eyes, a sudden rush of wind swept through the clearing, extinguishing the torches and plunging us into darkness. The drums fell silent, and a palpable tension filled the air. "What have you done?" Tom growled, his voice low and threatening. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows, cloaked in darkness, its form shifting and undulating like smoke. The crowd gasped, fear etched on their faces as they stepped back. "Who dares to challenge the will of the woods?" the figure boomed, its voice echoing with an otherworldly resonance. I felt a chill creep into my bones, and instinctively I took a step back, glancing at the townsfolk who were now frozen in fear. Tom, however, straightened, lifting his blade defiantly. "We have come to offer a sacrifice. We will not be swayed by this apparition." The figure laughed, a low mocking sound that sent shivers down my spine. "Sacrifice. You think your offerings will satisfy the hunger. The woods demand more than just blood. They crave something deeper, fear, despair, your very souls." The townsfolk looked horrified, their faces pale as they realized the magnitude of what they were dealing with. "What do you want from us?" the woman shouted, stepping forward, her voice trembling but fierce. "We will not bow to you." "Foolish mortals," the figure hissed, its voice echoing ominously through the clearing. "Your defiance only feeds the darkness. You cannot escape what you have unleashed. The woods have awakened, and they will claim their due." Just then, the ground trembled beneath us, and the trees swayed violently as if caught in a storm. The crowd erupted into chaos, people screaming and scrambling for safety. I stumbled backward, my heart racing as I felt the fear clawing at my throat. "Run," I shouted, turning to flee as the darkness closed in around me. But as I turned to leave, I saw the woman from the diner still standing there, defiant against the encroaching shadows. "Stay strong," I yelled, urging her to come with me. "We can fight this." But before she could respond, the figure lunged forward, tendrils of darkness reaching out toward her. In a split second, I made a choice. I rushed back into the fray, grabbing her arm just as the shadows wrapped around her. "We can't let it take you," I shouted, pulling her back with all my strength. As I yanked her away from the darkness, I felt a rush of energy surge through me. The figure recoiled, hissing in frustration, and for a brief moment, the shadows retreated, allowing us a precious moment to escape. "Come on," I urged, dragging her away from the chaos. We ran together, heart pounding in rhythm as the woods closed in behind us, the sounds of the drums fading into the distance. But as we fled, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had only just begun to unravel the darkness that shrouded Jericho Hollow. The Harvest Festival had awakened something far more sinister, and it was only a matter of time before the town, and perhaps the entire region, would pay the price for their centuries-old pact with the woods. We emerged from the forest, breathless and terrified, standing at the edge of the clearing where my car was parked. The woman turned to me, her expression a mix of fear and gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I thought I was going to be taken." "We can't let them sacrifice anyone," I replied, my heart still racing. "We have to find a way to stop this madness." "But how?" she asked, panic rising in her voice. "They won't listen to us, Tom. He's too powerful. He's convinced them that this is the only way." I thought for a moment, my mind racing. What if we gather evidence? We need proof of what's happening here, something that can show the world what Jericho Hollow really is. She nodded, her resolve strengthening. "You're right. We need to expose this darkness before it consumes us all." With renewed determination, we climbed into the car, my hands shaking as I started the engine. The familiar hum filled the air, a stark contrast to the chaos we had just fled. But I knew that our fight was far from over. As we drove away from the town, I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the dark figure chasing us. But instead, the town loomed behind us, shrouded in darkness, a sinister reminder of the horrors we had encountered. "Where do we go now?" she asked, her voice quiet as we left the town behind. "We need to find a way to warn others," I replied, my resolve hardening. "We need to gather allies, people who will believe us. This darkness can't be allowed to spread." The weight of my words hung in the air, and I felt a renewed sense of purpose wash over me. I would not allow the darkness of Jericho Hollow to claim more souls. We would expose the truth, shine a light into the shadows, and fight for those who had been silenced for too long. With the drums echoing in my mind, and the knowledge of the town's dark secrets burning in my heart, I pressed the gas pedal, my determination unyielding. We were on the brink of a battle that would shake the very foundations of Jericho Hollow, and we were ready to face it together. The night stretched out before us, filled with uncertainty and danger, but we would not falter. The Harvest Festival was only the beginning, and I would ensure that the darkness lurking in those woods would be brought to light, no matter the cost. The drive away from Jericho Hollow felt surreal. The events of the night replayed in my mind, like a nightmarish film I couldn't escape. I could still hear the rhythmic thumping of the drums echoing in my ears, a constant reminder of the chaos we had narrowly escaped. I glanced at my companion, the woman from the diner. "What's your name?" I asked, breaking the silence that hung heavy between us. "Clara," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "And you?" "Evelyn," I said, feeling the weight of my own name. "Thank you for standing up against them. I know it must have been terrifying." She nodded, her gaze fixed on the road ahead. "I've seen too much. The townsfolk are caught in a cycle of fear, and they don't even realize how deep it goes. It's been happening for generations, but I thought maybe this year, maybe I could change it. Your courage was admirable, I said, my heart swelling with respect. We need more people like you if we're going to stand a chance. Clara looked at me, her expression somber. But can we really change anything? Tom and the others are so entrenched in their beliefs. They think this is the only way to survive. We have to try, I said, gripping the steering wheel tightly. If we don't fight for the truth, then what's the point? As we drove further away from the town, the dark silhouette of the mountains loomed in the distance. I could feel their oppressive weight, a reminder of the danger that still lingered. Where do we go now? Clara asked, her voice laced with uncertainty. I thought for a moment. We need to find somewhere safe to regroup, somewhere we can plan our next move. We have to gather evidence, but we also need to reach out to others who might believe us. Like the media, she suggested. If we can get them to come and investigate. I nodded. Exactly. We need to show the world what's happening in Jericho Hollow before it's too late. As we drove through the winding roads, I felt a sense of urgency wash over me. The town's secrets were like a coiled snake, waiting to strike, and I was determined to expose the darkness before it could claim more victims. After what felt like hours, we finally reached a small motel on the outskirts of a neighboring town. The neon sign flickered overhead, casting an eerie glow on the cracked pavement. I parked the car and turned to Clara, determination etched on my face. Let's get settled in and then start making calls, I said, my voice steady. We need to gather evidence and reach out to anyone who might listen. Clara nodded, her expression resolute. We made our way to the reception desk, where an elderly woman greeted us with a warm smile. Looking for a room, she asked, her eyes twinkling. Just for the night, I replied, handing over my ID. We're passing through. Right on, room 7, just down the hall. Don't mind the creaks, this place has been here for ages. She chuckled, handing me the key. As we made our way to the room, Clara's gaze drifted toward the woods that bordered the motel. Do you think they'll come after us? I took a deep breath, trying to suppress the fear rising in my chest. I don't know, but we need to stay vigilant. The festival hasn't happened yet, but they're bound to notice our absence. Once inside our room, I set my backpack on the small table and turned on the lamp. The light flickered slightly, casting strange shadows against the wall. Clara sat on the edge of the bed, her expression thoughtful. What do we do first? She asked, biting her lip. Let's document everything we know, I replied, pulling out my laptop. We need to piece together the history of Jericho Hollow and its rituals. If we can find any evidence of past sacrifices or even news articles, it could help support our claims. Clara nodded, and we spent the next few hours digging into the town's dark past. I scoured the internet for articles, searching for any mention of Jericho Hollow, its history, or any incidents that could shed light on the mystery surrounding the Harvest Festival. As I delved deeper, I found snippets of information that sent chills down my spine. Accounts of missing persons, strange occurrences, and whispered tales of an ancient pact made with the woods. Each article I read was like a piece of a larger puzzle, revealing a dark tapestry woven through the town's history. Clara, meanwhile, had gathered her thoughts and began typing her own account of what we had witnessed. If we can show how this has affected real people, she said, her fingers flying across the keyboard, maybe we can appeal to their humanity. Hours passed, and the night grew deeper, enveloping us in a shroud of uncertainty. Finally, I leaned back in my chair, exhaustion weighing heavy on my eyelids. I think I've found enough material to start reaching out, I said, rubbing my eyes, but we'll need to be careful. If anyone in Jericho Hollow realizes what we're doing, they'll come after us, Clara finished, her voice low. I know. Just then, my phone buzzed on the table, breaking the heavy silence. I picked it up and saw a notification from an unfamiliar number. Curiosity piqued, I opened it to find a message that made my heart race. I know what you've seen. Meet me at the old church at midnight if you want the truth. What is it? Clara asked, leaning over to see my screen. I turned my phone to show her, my heart pounding. A message from someone who knows about Jericho Hollow. They want to meet tonight. Should we go? She asked, her brow furrowing with concern. I hesitated, weighing the options. It could be a trap, or it could be the lead we need. We can't ignore it. If there's a chance to get more information, we have to take it. Clara took a deep breath, her eyes locked on mine. Then we go, but we have to be smart about it. We can't let our guard down. Agreed, I said, determination flaring in my chest. We quickly gathered our belongings, slipping into jackets and tucking our phones into our pockets. As we stepped outside, the chill of the night air hit us, and I felt a shiver race down my spine. The moon hung high in the sky, illuminating the path ahead, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into a trap. We made our way through the darkened streets, the motel fading into the distance as we headed toward the old church. Its silhouette loomed ahead, a relic of a forgotten time, surrounded by twisted trees that seemed to whisper secrets in the wind. I can't believe we're doing this, Clara said, her voice tinged with anxiety. We need answers, I replied, my heart racing. We have to confront the darkness head on. As we approached the church, I felt a surge of adrenaline coursing through my veins. The door creaked open, and I stepped inside, the musty smell of decay hitting me like a wall. The interior was dimly lit, shadows dancing along the walls as the moonlight filtered through stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns on the floor. "Hello," I called out, my voice echoing in the silence. "Is anyone here?" A figure emerged from the shadows, stepping into the light. It was a man, his face lined with age, eyes gleaming with an intensity that sent shivers down my spine. "I'm glad you came," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "You're in great danger, both of you." "Who are you?" Clara asked, her voice steady despite the fear that flickered in her eyes. "My name is Samuel," he replied, his gaze unwavering. "I've been watching you, and I know what you've uncovered. Jericho Hollow is a place of darkness, bound by ancient rituals that must never be broken." "What do you mean?" I asked, leaning closer. "We want to expose the truth. We can't let them continue this madness." Samuel nodded slowly, a grave expression on his face. "But you don't understand the consequences. The woods are not just a backdrop, they are alive, a force that demands respect. You risk awakening something far worse than you can imagine." Clara stepped forward, her voice firm. "What do you know about the Harvest Festival? About the sacrifices?" He sighed deeply, his eyes clouding with memories. "The festival has been held for generations, a pact made with the woods to ensure the town's prosperity. But over the years, the balance has shifted. The woods no longer hunger for mere offerings, they demand the very essence of life." "What does that mean?" I asked, my heart racing. "It means that the price is higher than ever," Samuel replied, his voice grave. "The more they sacrifice, the stronger the woods become. They're awakening an ancient entity, one that has been lying dormant for centuries, waiting for the right moment to claim what is theirs." The weight of his words settled over us like a shroud. I could feel the fear creeping in, but I knew we couldn't back down. "Is there any way to stop this?" I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. Samuel nodded slowly. "You must confront the darkness before dawn breaks. You need to gather the townsfolk and show them the truth of what they've done. They must be made aware of the consequences of their actions." "But they're too far gone," Clara said, shaking her head. "They won't listen. They're bound by fear." "Fear is a powerful motivator," Samuel replied. "But it can also be a catalyst for change. If you can find a way to awaken their humanity, to remind them of their own fears, show them that this cycle of sacrifice will only bring ruin, they may stand with you." "Do you know how?" I pressed, my mind racing with possibilities. He glanced toward the stained glass windows, the moonlight illuminating the intricate designs. "You need to bring the truth to light, quite literally. There's a book, the town's history bound within its pages. It holds the key to the rituals and sacrifices, evidence of the darkness that has plagued Jericho Hollow for centuries." "Where can we find it?" I asked, my heart racing. "The old library," Samuel said, his voice filled with urgency. "But you must hurry. The festival will begin at dawn, and if you don't stop it, the woods will claim another soul." With that, he reached into his coat and pulled out a small, leather-bound book, handing it to me. "This is a guide, a map to help you navigate the town's history. Use it wisely." I took the book, my hands trembling. "Thank you," I said, my heart swelling with gratitude. But remember, Samuel warned, his gaze intense. The woods do not take kindly to intruders. You must tread carefully. They will watch your every move. With those final words, he stepped back into the shadows, leaving Clara and me standing in the eerie stillness of the church. We need to go now, I said, clutching the book tightly. We have to get to the library and uncover the truth before it's too late. As we stepped back into the night, I felt a renewed sense of purpose wash over me. The darkness of Jericho Hollow had taken so much from the townsfolk, but I was determined to bring the truth to light. Together, Clara and I would face the horrors that awaited us and fight for the souls trapped in the shadows. Part 6. The Library of Secrets. The night felt heavy as Clara and I navigated the dimly lit streets of Jericho Hollow, the town draped in an ominous silence that was only broken by the distant hoot of an owl. I clutched the leather-bound book tightly, my mind racing with the implications of Samuel's words. If we could find the evidence to reveal the truth about the Harvest Festival, we might just stand a chance against the darkness that had plagued this town for generations. "Where is the library?" Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "According to the book, it should be on Maple Street," I replied, flipping through the pages. The paper felt worn and fragile under my fingers, as if it held secrets long forgotten. The illustrations depicted scenes from the town's past, images of the woods and the eerie rituals that had taken place under the cover of darkness. As we approached Maple Street, the air grew thick with tension. The houses that lined the street were dilapidated, their windows boarded up as if the residents were trying to keep the darkness at bay. My heart raced with every step, each thought echoing like a drumbeat in my ears. I could feel the weight of the townsfolk's fears pressing down on me, and I couldn't help but wonder if we were walking into a trap. "There it is," I whispered, pointing toward a crumbling building at the end of the street. Its sign hung askew, barely legible in the moonlight. Jericho Hollow Public Library. The door creaked open easily, a heavy smell of mildew greeting us as we stepped inside. Dust motes danced in the beams of moonlight that filtered through the grimy windows. The library was a labyrinth of towering shelves filled with books, most of which looked forgotten, as if the stories they held had been buried alongside the town's dark history. "Where do we even begin?" Clara asked, looking around in awe and dread. "The history section," I replied, scanning the shelves for any sign of a history book on Jericho Hollow. If Samuel is right, there has to be something here that documents the sacrifices, something we can use to show the townsfolk the truth. We made our way to the back of the library, where a dimly lit sign pointed toward the history section. As we sifted through the dust-covered tomes, the tension in the air felt palpable, as if the very walls were holding their breath. "Here," Clara exclaimed, pulling out a large, leather-bound book that looked significantly older than the others. "This one looks promising." I took the book from her, opening it carefully. The pages were filled with fading ink and yellowing paper, chronicling the town's history from its founding to the present day. My fingers trembled as I flipped through the pages, desperate to find anything that could help us. "Look at this," I said, my heart racing as I found a passage detailing the origins of the Harvest Festival. It describes a pact made by the town's founders with the woods, offering sacrifices in exchange for prosperity and protection. But it says here that the nature of the sacrifices has changed over the years. "What does it say?" Clara asked, peering over my shoulder. "It mentions that the sacrifices used to be livestock, but as time went on, they turned to human offerings. People who disappeared without a trace," I replied, my stomach churning. Suddenly, a noise echoed through the library, sending a jolt of fear through me. I froze, listening intently. Clara's eyes widened, her breath catching in her throat. "Do you hear that?" she whispered, fear etching her features. "Stay close," I murmured, my heart racing as I glanced around the dimly lit space. The sound came again, a low, rumbling growl that seemed to reverberate through the very walls of the library. We moved cautiously deeper into the stacks, searching for the source of the noise. My skin prickled with the sensation of being watched, and I could feel the oppressive weight of the darkness closing in around us. Then I saw it, a shadow shifting at the far end of the aisle. My breath caught in my throat as I gestured for Clara to stay quiet. The figure seemed to flicker in and out of existence, its form barely discernible in the dim light. "What is that?" Clara whispered, her voice shaking. I couldn't answer. We needed to get out of there, and fast. This way, I urged, leading her toward a back exit. Just as we turned, the shadow lunged forward, revealing itself as a grotesque figure cloaked in darkness, its eyes glowing with a malevolent light. "Foolish mortals," it hissed, its voice echoing like a thunderclap. "You dare to defy the will of the woods?" My heart raced as I grabbed Clara's hand, pulling her toward a nearby door. "Run," I shouted, adrenaline surging through me as we dashed toward the exit. The figure followed, its presence a palpable weight in the air as we burst through the door and into the cool night. "Where do we go?" Clara panted, her eyes wide with fear. I glanced around, scanning for any sign of safety. "To the church. Samuel said we need to gather the townsfolk and confront the darkness." As we sprinted down the street, the growl of the figure echoed behind us, growing louder with each step. I could feel its rage fueling the air, thick and suffocating. We reached the church just as the first light of dawn began to break on the horizon. I pushed the door open, and we stumbled inside, breathless and terrified. "Samuel," I shouted, hoping he would still be there. But the church was empty, the silence almost deafening. "We have to make them listen," I said, my voice trembling. "We have to gather the townsfolk. They need to know the truth before it's too late." Clara nodded, determination shining in her eyes. "Let's do it." As we stepped outside, the townsfolk were beginning to stir, preparing for the harvest festival. The drums were starting to beat again, and the familiar feeling of dread washed over me. "Everyone," I shouted, my voice rising above the growing noise of the drums. "We need to talk. It's about the harvest festival." Some turned to look, confusion etched on their faces, while others continued about their business, dismissing us. "Please," Clara shouted, stepping forward. "You don't understand what's happening. The sacrifices." But before she could finish, Tom stepped forward, a menacing glare on his face. "You two need to stop spreading lies. The festival is for the good of the town. We must keep the pact." "No," I shouted, stepping closer. "You're wrong. The woods have awoken. It's not just a pact anymore. It's a hunger. They want more than just blood. They want souls." A murmur rippled through the crowd, and I could see doubt creeping into their eyes. "You don't know what you're talking about," Tom spat, his voice rising. "You're trying to ruin everything we've worked for." "No," Clara shouted back, her voice fierce. "You're the one ruining everything. The sacrifices have gone too far, and if you don't stop, the woods will take everything from us." The drums intensified, drowning out our voices. The townsfolk began to shift uneasily, glancing between Tom and us. "Listen to us," I pleaded, my heart racing. "We found evidence, ancient texts that detail the true nature of the sacrifices. You've been living in fear for too long, and if you don't break this cycle, the darkness will consume us all." At that moment, a heavy silence fell over the crowd as the realization began to sink in. I could see the fear in their eyes, the uncertainty that had gripped them for so long. "What evidence?" someone finally called out, stepping forward. Clara and I exchanged a glance, my heart pounding as I realized this was our chance. "Follow us," I shouted, turning back toward the church. "We'll show you." We led the townsfolk inside the church, Clara and I flipping through the pages of the leather-bound book as we explained the history of Jericho Hollow and the sacrifices that had been made. "This is the truth," I shouted, holding the book aloft. "These are the accounts of the people who disappeared. The woods demand more than blood now. They crave despair and fear." As the townsfolk began to gather around, whispers of doubt turned into shouts of anger and fear. "We've been living in darkness for too long," Clara shouted, her voice ringing out above the chaos. "If we don't stand together now, we'll lose everything." Tom stepped forward, anger etched on his face. "You think you can just come here and tear down everything we've built? This is our tradition. Tradition built on fear and sacrifice," I shot back. "The woods are alive, and they are hungry for more. We have to take back our power." For a moment, the crowd wavered, uncertainty flickering in their eyes as they began to question Tom's authority. Then, from the back of the crowd, an older man stepped forward. "What if they're right?" he asked, his voice trembling. "What if we've been wrong all along?" The murmurs grew louder as more townsfolk began to voice their doubts, their eyes shifting between Tom and us. Listen to them, the man continued, gesturing toward Clara and me. We've lost too many good people to the wood's hunger. It's time to end this cycle of sacrifice. The tide began to turn, the townsfolk's fear transforming into resolve. Enough, Tom shouted, his voice filled with fury. You'll regret this. You'll all regret believing these outsiders. But the crowd was no longer listening. They were beginning to realize the truth, and as they gathered around us, I felt a wave of hope wash over me. We need to stand together, I said, my voice steady. If we unite against the darkness, we can break the pact. But we must act now, before it's too late. The drums outside continued to beat, a sinister rhythm echoing through the air. The townsfolk nodded, determination rising within them as they prepared to confront the shadows that had haunted Jericho Hollow for too long. Let's end this, Clara said, her voice filled with courage. Together. As we stepped out of the church, the morning light began to break, illuminating the town in a golden glow. The drums fell silent, and for the first time, I felt a glimmer of hope. But I knew the battle was far from over. The darkness would not give up easily, and I could still feel its presence lurking just beyond the trees. Stay close, I shouted, rallying the townsfolk around us. We face this together. As we marched toward the woods, I felt the weight of their fears behind us, but I also felt the strength of our unity. We were ready to confront the darkness and reclaim our town, together. Part 7. Into the darkness. The woods loomed ahead, a twisted mass of shadows and ancient trees, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal hands. The townsfolk gathered around us, a mix of fear and determination in their eyes. Are you ready? Clara asked, her voice steady but filled with trepidation. We have to be, I replied, gripping the leather-bound book tightly. We have to show them that we're not afraid. As we entered the woods, the air thickened with an unnatural tension. The shadows danced around us, whispering secrets that sent shivers down my spine. I could feel the wood's hunger, an insatiable desire for sacrifice that pulsed like a heartbeat beneath the surface. Stay together, I urged, my heart pounding in my chest. We mustn't let the darkness divide us. The further we ventured, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. It felt as if the very trees were watching us, their eyes hidden within the knots of the bark. Clara walked beside me, her expression fierce as she clutched her phone, ready to document everything we encountered. Suddenly, a low growl reverberated through the air, causing the townsfolk to freeze in fear. The growl came again, closer this time, and I could see movement in the shadows. What is that? One of the townsfolk whispered, eyes wide with terror. I don't know, I replied, my voice steady, but we can't let it scare us. We need to push through. As we pressed on, the growling intensified, echoing around us like a predator stalking its prey. The darkness felt alive, thrumming with a malevolent energy that threatened to engulf us. Then, from the shadows, the grotesque figure emerged, its eyes glowing with fury. You dare to trespass in my domain, it hissed, its voice a chilling echo. I stepped forward, my heart racing. We're here to confront the darkness, to end the sacrifices and reclaim our town. The figure laughed, a sound that reverberated through the air like thunder. You think you can break the pact? You're nothing but mortals, bound by your fears. The woods demand their due. Enough, I shouted, my voice ringing out above the growl of the creature. We refuse to be afraid. We are united, and we will not be your sacrifices. The townsfolk rallied behind me, their voices rising in defiance. We are not afraid. The figure's expression twisted with rage, and it lunged forward, but the townsfolk stood firm, creating a wall of determination between it and me. Together, Clara shouted, raising her phone like a weapon. Let's show it our strength. With that, she pressed the record button and began documenting the confrontation. The light from her phone illuminated our faces, casting a stark contrast against the darkness surrounding us. Your light cannot save you, the figure roared, but I could see its confidence wavering. The collective will of the townsfolk was like a beacon of hope, pushing back against the darkness. Hold your ground, I shouted, urging everyone to stand firm. We are not the sacrifices you seek. The figure hesitated, its form flickering as if it were unsure how to react. The shadows around it seemed to ripple, reflecting its inner turmoil. Enough, it screamed, lunging forward again, but this time, I held my ground. You cannot intimidate us any longer. We know your secrets. Then you will perish like the rest, it hissed, its eyes narrowing in fury. No, I shouted, my voice filled with resolve. We will break the cycle of fear and sacrifice. We will expose you for what you are. With that, I opened the leather-bound book, pointing to the passages that documented the sacrifices, the history that had bound the townsfolk to fear for so long. Look, I urged, showing the townsfolk the evidence of the darkness that had plagued them for generations. This is the truth of Jericho Hollow. We will no longer be your victims. The figure recoiled, its form flickering as if it were losing its grip on reality. The townsfolk gasped, their fear transforming into anger and determination. Stand together, Clara shouted, her voice ringing out like a rallying cry. This is our home, and we will not let fear control us any longer. The darkness began to recede as the light from Clara's phone shone brighter, illuminating the path ahead. Together, I urged, and we began to chant, our voices rising in unison. We are not afraid. We are not afraid. With each repetition, the figure trembled, its form twisting as if caught in a storm. The shadows around us writhed and twisted, and I could feel the energy shifting. Then, with one final cry, the figure let out a shriek that echoed through the woods, shaking the very ground beneath us. The darkness surged, but we held our ground, refusing to back down. As the last echoes of its fury faded, the woods fell silent, the malevolent energy dissipating like mist in the morning sun. We did it, Clara exclaimed, a mixture of disbelief and relief washing over her face. But as we turned to the townsfolk, I saw the shadows lingering in their eyes, the fear that had been so deeply ingrained still fighting to hold on. This isn't over, I said, my heart heavy. We must remain vigilant. The darkness may retreat, but it won't disappear entirely. We must work together to ensure it never returns. The townsfolk nodded, their faces a mix of determination and fear, but I could see a flicker of hope igniting in their eyes. We'll stand together, one of the townsfolk said, his voice steady. We'll protect our home. And as the dawn broke over Jericho Hollow, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The darkness had been confronted, but the battle for the soul of the town was just beginning. Together, Clara and I would continue to uncover the secrets of Jericho Hollow and ensure that the cycle of sacrifice would end, once and for all.